All right, we want to continue on now and talk about the enlightenment in the time we have left today. Good. Remember the last lecture when we just ended, talked about philosophers. And I said that philosophers were motivational philosophers. They sometimes live in a van down by the river. No, not usually. Now, what about these philosophers? The philosophers were mostly French, although not exclusively. You don't have to be French to be a philosopher. But just statistically speaking, most of them were. Many of them were professors. Some of them were statesmen. They kind of worked in government. But here's one thing they all had in common. They wanted to change things. They were social reformers. Remember I said, a sort of regular philosopher is probably willing just to sit around in the office and write things and, just sort of for fun. If people like it, read it, that's great. But a philosopher is not satisfied with just somebody reading the stuff. They want them to do it. They're sort of like a philosophical evangelist, right? We're not talking about just theoretical stuff here. We want you to go out and do this stuff. So if we think about this, I put this map up here. Came out of the textbook, at least one version of the textbook. And it has on there, which is kind of hard to see, but it does show you academic centers. Those are sort of the red dots or reddish colored dots. The little things that look like little books, those little black rectangles, that's where they're publishing scientific journals. Look at how many of those are in France, in Italy, and England, right? That's where really most of them are. And so a lot of this is in France because the knowledge is there, the money is there, and the desire to change things is there. So there's a lot of philosophers. I'm going to limit myself to only talk about three main ones. This will kind of be an outline of, the other ones sort of fit this pattern, because we can't talk about them all. Now I'm going to give you the name of all three of these, and you're going to want to write down all the dates and all the names. But let me just warn you, I'm going to go real fast from here, but each one of these names is going to be on another screen. So don't worry. Plus, you can always go back, when you have insomnia and listen to this again.
Do you want to know all the dates?
Well, you need them for your terms, don't you? Yeah, maybe. These guys might be on your terms. Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Diderot. If you're asking about in general, you kind of have to know some dates, right? Because if you don't know when things happened at all, you got to have a place sort of like a hook to hang things. Yes?
Are these slides on Brightspace?
They should be. They will be. They're not there yet. I'm recording it right now. Yeah. Somebody's peeking in the door. Oh, now they left. Well, Montesquieu. Let's talk about Montesquieu. Here's another thing I'd say about these philosophers, all these guys I'm talking about right now. How do I put this in a nice? Let me put this in a positive way. None of them suffer from low self-esteem. How's that? None of them suffer from low self-esteem. These guys are quite full of esteem for themselves. All right, Montesquieu, 1689 to 1755. Now, he actually came from the upper class. He was part of a noble family. He studied classical studies and law. What are classical studies, if you had to guess? What would you say they are? What's that?
Literature.
It is literature. Well, what kind of literature in particular?
Musical literature?
No, not musical literature.
Scientific.
No?
Greek.
What? What did you, no? It's Greek and Roman literature, primarily in history. Those are classical studies. If you had a classics department, that's what you would study. By the way, classics departments have taken it on the chin. That means they've been punched right in the chin and knocked them out. They've been knocked out of most universities. Not all of them. But that's where you would study Latin, Greek, the writings of Homer and Ovid and so forth, right? So that's the kind of stuff he's studying. The idea here is that you study these sort of classic texts, and then you can apply those today. Well, he's going to study that in law. Now, one of the things that he writes, he's going to be critical of his society at his time. That's France. And so in 1751, he will write a work called the Persian Letters. The Persian Letters. Anybody know where Persia is? What we call it today normally? Not Iraq. Iran. Yeah, that's Persia. That's the older name for it. Some people still use the word Persia, but usually not today. Anyway, the idea here is that people from Persia have traveled to France. See, he's using a literary device. He's using a vehicle, if you will. He's going to pretend to be Persians who are visiting France, and they're writing letters back home to their family, their friends back in Persia, saying, we're here in France, look at this stuff we're seeing, we don't know why they're doing this kind of stuff. See, it's a way to criticize it. Be as if somebody said, oh, you know, they're from Minnesota, they're from Canada, and they come down to Florida, and so it's really a guy that lives in Florida, and he says, oh, these Floridians, you know, you can't believe what they do with the alligators or whatever, and he writes back to home, you wouldn't believe what they have here, the humidity, stuff like that. So this is a way to criticize, and he's using it to criticize the government, sort of the church, and other things like that. It's a way to sort of hide himself. If he just writes it himself, it seems pretty harsh. But if he says, well, this is really, these Persians come here, they don't understand this, and it doesn't make sense to them, and maybe it doesn't make sense to anybody, right? We're not usually so, in our day and age, we're not so subtle as that anymore, right? We don't use literary devices to hide what it, we just blurt it out there, right? We don't have much tact or demeanor, you know, like a sort of, oh, I'm going to sort of be nice, play nice. I'm just going to dump it out there, man. Take it or leave it. Well, this is the vehicle he's using, and this allows him then to criticize the Roman Catholic Church. And by the way, this was the church in France. I abbreviated here just RCC, so I don't have to write out Roman Catholic Church, but that's what I mean by RCC. And the monarchy, which was very powerful in France at this time. The government. Montague. Look at his portrait. I mean, the guy looks like does not suffer from low self-esteem, right? Okay. Well, what are some of the common themes in not only Montague's ideas, but in most of these philosophers? Here's some of the common themes. Number one thing is they attack religion. I mean, they go after it. And when I mean religion here, I mean the Roman Catholic Church, Christianity, especially Roman Catholic Christianity, and the church. Because remember, the church was the most powerful, one of the most powerful entities in France at the time. They were the largest landowner. They had a lot of money. They had a lot of land. They had a lot of influence. And they got blamed for a lot of things. Maybe some of them true, maybe some of them exaggerated. But that was one of the number one targets, was the church. Because these guys wanted intolerance to end. They wanted everyone to be tolerant. And obviously, Christianity, to be honest with you, in our society today, I probably shouldn't say this because probably somebody's listening. Christianity is not a tolerant religion. What? How can that be? Christianity says you really need to be a Christian, right? Christianity says salvation only comes through one way. Not many roads lead to heaven. One road leads to heaven, right? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, the life. He didn't say, I'm one of the ways, I'm one of the truths. That's kind of exclusive. That doesn't fit very well in our society today. Our sort of multicultural and, everything, just believe whatever you want, man. Everything's fine. Just sort of, yeah. Anyway, and that's what they're going after. Well, another thing they attack, of course, we might agree with, is slavery, because slavery was around in Europe, and Europeans were involved in slave trade, and they're pushing religious toleration. This primarily means that in Europe at that time, there wasn't a lot of diverse religion. Like 95% of the people are Roman Catholic, but there's maybe 5-6% of the people that aren't. And what are they? Some of them are Jews. Some of them are Protestants. See, because the Roman Catholics didn't even like the Protestants. So, Protestants would be included in that, say 8 to 10% of non-Roman Catholics. Jews, occasionally a Muslim, but not too many in France at this time. And that's about it. There might be a few others. Maybe some deist hiding out there. Something like that. Well, we should be accepting of all those things. Because they said reason liberates from prejudice, and I suppose the reverse, religion ties you to prejudice. Well, he writes all this down in his work, The Spirit of the Laws, in 1748. You see the title page here from Montague. This one, of course, is in English. And is really basing a lot of this enlightenment is based upon this idea of the scientific laws, the politics, society, all based upon science, the Newtonian world machine, all that kind of stuff. There's a logic to all this, and there's an order to all of this. This is going to be another thing. There's order there. And what you really need to do is figure out what that order is. Figure out the key to that order. Once you figure that out, you can understand government, economy, religion, science, everything has an order to it. Laws. These are sometimes called the natural laws. So the natural laws of government are there. Government should be set up in a certain way. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Any of that sound familiar to you? I hope it does.
MLK's speech?
What's that?
You said MLK's speech, right?
No.
No?
That's coming from the Constitution.
Oh, wow.
Now, he may have quoted it, I don't know, but that's what I'm quoting.
Similar to it.
Yeah, well, it does. It kind of sounds similar, doesn't it? The idea of equality, the idea of, that God has endowed us with certain things. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, it's very poetic. Sounds great, right? Read your Constitution. It's pretty neat. A lot of people don't read it. Now, this isn't an American history class, but the ideas of the American Constitution flow right out of the Enlightenment. And the idea that there's sort of a natural way, the proper way in which the government ought to be, the economy ought to be, science ought to be, the world ought to be. That's coming right out of the scientific revolution ideas. They believed that there were 3 kinds of governments. This is what they would teach. This is another sort of basic idea of the philosophers and of Enlightenment thinking. There's a monarchy, having a king. Okay, that's all right for sort of a medium-sized country. If you have a small country, then you could have a republic. That's where the people have representatives. That's really what the United States has, right? We're not really technically a democracy. We're a republic. We elect a representative, and the representative goes and theoretically represents you and me, right? From this congressional district. I don't know what we are, number 8, Florida Congressional District. I don't know what we are. But anyway, so we vote somebody in, and then that person goes to Washington, D.C., and when this stuff happens, the idea here, of course, this is part of the question that some people have. Does that person represent what they think, or do they represent what we think? And how close do those two things match up? Well, that's a representative form of government. That's a republic. That's what we have. And then, of course, they said the third kind, of course, this is a really bad one. They just called them a despotism. You know, kind of like a bad dictator, absolute king, large empires. This is what they were fighting against, they felt, in France. All these ideas influence our American Constitution, of which I attempted to quote, perhaps not as well as I should have, but that's in there. People like Jefferson and Franklin, and you know, these guys studied Enlightenment. They studied Enlightenment thinkers. You might even call Benjamin Franklin an American philosopher, if you wanted to. I don't know if anybody has. I guess I have. Seems like it to me. What's that? Oh, okay. Voltaire. Here, I told you we'd get all three of them. This is our second one now. Voltaire, 1694 to 1778. Not nobility. He is from a middle-class kind of background. And this is what we're going to find for a lot of these philosophers. They're actually trained by the church, but then they turn on the church. Because really, you know, universities were started by the church. What? Yes. University, the idea of a university started with the church, and it started in Europe, in France, and then shortly thereafter in England. And the oldest universities here in the United States were all started by churches. Brown, and Harvard, and Yale. You can look up their history. All started by churches. The idea of big state universities, that didn't come till about the 1880s, 1890s, after the Civil War, funded by the state. State universities were much later. Well, we've still got a couple minutes. Let's finish this screen out. He was educated by the Jesuits. Voltaire was very critical of the church. Whew, I mean, wow. He wrote many plays, many letters, many pamphlets, many novels. He studied law, but what he really wanted to be was a writer. So this is the kind of thing that really encourages, let's say, parents when somebody comes home and they meet this special someone, and that special someone says, "Yes, I'm a freelance novelist." Well, what are your plans? I'm going to be a freelance travel photographer. You know, in my thinking, if somebody uses the word freelance, it means unemployed. That's what I'm thinking. Unemployed, no income. How are you going to pay for things? You know, that's me. I'm kind of a practical guy. I like to tell people to follow their dreams, but you do have to eat along the way. Well, I see we still got 2 minutes. People are packing, so let me go to the next screen. And here you're going to get a nice video of a duck pounding on the church. Why is the duck pounding on the church? Well, I don't know why. He's trying to crush the infamous thing. What is the infamous thing? The infamous thing is the church. Voltaire says, crush the infamous. Of course, he said it in French. Crush the infamous thing, and infamous is the church. You know what infamous is? It's when you're famous for doing bad things. You're famous. Jeffrey Dahmer, you ever heard of him? Yeah. He's famous, but for bad stuff, right? He's infamous. The church, they believed, was infamous. He argues for deism because I think he was afraid to go to atheism. He thought the crowds might turn on him. He believed Jesus was a good fellow but not divine. He feared atheism because of what it might do, what the people might do. You know, religion has a settling effect upon people. Think about it. Let's say, you know, somebody does something bad to you. What is religion? What's the Bible say to do? Turn the other cheek, right? And if somebody's doing something bad to you, the idea is, you know, in the end, God is going to get them. I shouldn't get them. Vengeance not mine. Vengeance is the Lord's. So that sort of calms things down. If things are not going well, now if you're the one doing bad stuff, you kind of like that religion at that point, because that means all these, like if all of you in here, 50 of you in here all got mad at me at once, I'm in big trouble. But if you're restrained by your belief that you shouldn't come up here and beat me up, well then I kind of for that, right? Like I am right now. Woo! We're out of time. We'll continue this later.